The ancient people of Israel cried out, "Give us a king." The desire for a king displeased Samuel, but Yahweh allowed Samuel to appoint a king over Israel. The desire for a king was an expression of idolatry. The Lord said to Samuel, "They have rejected me from being king over them. They have forsaken me and served other gods." The perennial temptation of humanity is to exalt human leaders to some kind of divine status. Admiration easily becomes adoration. In the theology of Israel, the king was the adopted son of Yahweh. Psalm 2 is a coronation hymn and reflects the relationship between Yahweh and the king. "But as for me, I have installed my king upon Zion, my holy mountain. I will surely tell of the decree of the Lord. He said to me, 'You are my son. Today I have begotten you.' Ask of me, and I will surely give the nations as your inheritance, and the very ends of the earth as your possession." Israelite theology was distinct among the nations of the ancient Near East. And the nations of the ancient Near East insisted that their kings were descended from the gods, but not so with ancient Israel. The kings of Israel were tragically human. Even though the office of king was sanctioned by Yahweh, the kings of Israel were failures. Saul acted foolishly by rebelling against the word of Yahweh and was dethroned. His successor was his son-in-law, David, a man after God's heart and the heroic warrior of Israel. But like too many successful leaders, David succumbed to temptation. When confronted by the prophet Nathan, David cried out, "I have sinned against the Lord." Psalm 51 is traditionally attributed as David's prayer of repentance, in which he laments, "Restore to me the joy of your salvation." But David's joy was not restored. Even though he was forgiven, the consequences of his sin were great, in that his family was profoundly dysfunctional. His son Absalom led a revolt. David died a broken man. Solomon ascended to the throne. And even though Solomon built the great temple in Jerusalem, he was a serial idolater. In fact, the history of the kings of Israel demonstrates the failure of the royal dynasty. With the fall of Jerusalem in 586 BC, the last of the Davidic kings, Zedekiah, witnessed the execution of his sons. He was blinded and carried away in chains to Babylon. Toxic leadership always leads to destruction. The prophets of Yahweh, agents of the word of Yahweh, were often at odds with corrupt kings. They did not unconditionally support the kings of Israel. Divine adoption did not exempt the kings from prophetic criticism or divine judgment. Jeremiah declared that Israel's status as God's covenant people would not protect them from prophetic criticism or the judgment of God. He lived to witness the destruction of Jerusalem and the exile of the people of God. Those who dare to speak for God must understand that their primary allegiance is to God's righteousness and God's kingdom. Government often reflects the narcissism of a highly toxic leader and the willful collusion of court prophets and a deluded populace. But we must resist the temptation of idolatry. In the years prior to the ascension of Constantine, the Roman Empire persecuted Christians. With the ascension of Constantine, Christianity was legalized and protected. Constantine converted to Christianity and called the Council of Nicaea to encourage the Christian bishops to come to some agreement on their doctrine of Christ. The myth is that the bishops capitulated to Constantine, but they did not. Those who survived the persecution of Diocletian did not surrender to their benefactor, Constantine. Instead, they rejected his preference for Arianism, that Jesus is the firstborn created Son of God, and the bishops insisted that Jesus is true God of the same substance of the Father. This is not theological hair-splitting. This is truth-telling. The gospel must never be compromised in favor of political expediency. We must be ever vigilant in the pursuit of the truth. Jesus Christ is the ruler of the kings of the earth. He is the King eternal, immortal, invisible, the only God, the blessed and only sovereign, the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Whereas the kings of Israel ultimately failed in their covenant responsibilities, Jesus Christ was truly after God's heart, declaring, "Not my will, but yours be done." He was tempted by the same idolatry of all kings before him, but he resisted. Because of his perfect obedience to the will of the Father, Jesus is declared to be the faithful and true witness of God. Christian faith and devotion trumps politics. Christians should be engaged in political discourse, but we must be very careful that our faith informs our politics rather than our politics shaping our faith.